The hall was filled with laughter and music, long tables covered with shining plates of food, roasted meat, colorful fruits, and drinks that sparkled under the lights. The alien nobles sat on golden chairs, their robes heavy with jewels. They spoke loudly, showing off their power and pride. At the far end of the table sat the children, small and nervous. They were not dressed in fine clothes. Their hands shook as they reached for bread and meat. For days they had eaten almost nothing, and now their hunger took control. They ate quickly, stuffing food into their mouths before it could be taken away. The nobles noticed, and their laughter grew sharper. One woman covered her mouth with fake shock. "Look at them, animals pretending to be children," she sneered. Another man slammed his fist on the table. "Shameful! They eat like beasts." The words were loud, the hall echoing with cruel amusement. The children froze, food still in their hands. Their stomachs growled, but their hearts pounded faster. They looked at each other with fear. One whispered, "Are we not allowed to eat?" Another answered with trembling lips, "Maybe we are not worthy." The guardians of the children stood nearby. They did not protect them. Instead, they pushed the children away from the table. "You embarrass us," one shouted. "You greedy mouths bring us shame." The nobles clapped and laughed as the children stumbled back. Plates were taken from their hands, food thrown on the floor. The smell of roasted meat filled the air, but their small bodies were dragged out of the hall. The door slammed behind them, leaving only the cold night outside. The banquet inside continued with music and laughter, but outside the children sat on the stone steps. Their eyes filled with tears, their stomachs twisted in pain. They could still hear the mocking voices, still see the jewels shining on the table that had rejected them. One of the younger children tried to pick a small piece of bread from the ground, but an older one stopped her. "No," he whispered. "They want us to look like beggars. Don't give them that victory." His voice was firm, but his eyes were wet with shame. The night air grew colder. Stars appeared in the sky. The children huddled together, wrapping their arms around each other, trying to stay warm. Every passerby from the town looked at them with disgust. Some whispered, "Greedy little creatures." Others laughed and pointed, "Thrown out for eating too much." The youngest began to cry. His tears fell quietly as he whispered, "Why are we hated for being hungry?" No one answered. Silence wrapped around them like another punishment. Inside the hall, music grew louder. The smell of roasted food drifted through the windows. Outside, the children's stomachs growled again. Each sound was a reminder of what they had lost. One child raised her head and looked at the others. Her voice was soft but filled with sadness. "Maybe no one will ever want us. Maybe we are nothing but mouths to feed." The others stayed silent. But deep inside their hearts, a seed of fear began to grow. Fear that she was right. Fear that they would always be left outside, hungry and unwanted. They did not know that their story was only beginning. They did not know that someone was already walking the same streets. Someone who would see them not as shame, but as family. The night was cruel, but the future was waiting. The night air pressed against the children like icy hands. The banquet hall was far behind now, its golden lights fading into the distance. They walked slowly through the stone streets of the alien town, their bare feet brushing against dust and broken glass. The streets were alive, but not with kindness. Shops were closing, doors slamming shut. Merchants packed their stalls, muttering curses when they saw the children pass. "Go away, greedy rats," one growled. "Don't beg here," another shouted. The children did not answer. They only kept walking. Their bellies hurt from hunger, but the deeper pain was the shame carved into their hearts. They pulled their thin robes tighter, trying to fight the cold. Their shadows stretched long and thin under the pale blue lamps of the street. One of the older boys tried to lead them toward an alley for shelter. His voice shook, but he tried to sound strong. "Stay close. No one will hurt us if we stay quiet." But his words were hollow. Everyone knew silence could not hide their weakness. In the alley, the smell of rotten food and damp walls made the youngest wrinkle her nose. Still, she sat down against the stone and hugged her knees. Her tears glistened in the dim light. "Why do they hate us so much?" she whispered. No one answered. They had all asked that question many times and never found an answer. A loud laugh echoed from the street. A group of alien youths walked by, their robes bright, their faces full of cruel delight. They spotted the children and threw scraps of rotten fruit at them. "Hungry pigs," one yelled, another shouted. "Eat this instead." The fruit smashed against the wall, the smell sour and heavy. The children ducked and pressed closer together. Their tiny hands held each other's arms as if to form a shield. Their eyes burned with shame. But none of them cried out. They had learned that tears only made the bullies laugh harder. When the youths finally left, silence filled the alley again. Only the sound of the wind remained, whistling through the narrow streets like a ghost. The children sat together, their bodies trembling not just from cold but from fear. One of the boys looked up at the sky. The stars shimmered like tiny diamonds, but to him they looked far away, unreachable. His voice was low. "Maybe the stars are the only ones who don't laugh at us." The others followed his gaze. Some felt comfort, others only felt smaller. The night stretched on, the hunger grew sharper. One child finally stood and whispered, "We can't stay here. If we sit too long, we will freeze." Slowly they rose again, their small group moving like shadows along the street. They passed the bright shops where rich families laughed and carried bags of food. The smell of warm bread drifted out, making their stomachs twist. But no one invited them inside. No one offered even a crumb. At the edge of the town, they found an abandoned fountain. The water had dried long ago, only cracked stone remained. They climbed into it and sat close together, wrapping arms and tails around each other for warmth. The youngest leaned her head against an older girl's shoulder. "Will tomorrow be the same?" she asked softly. The older girl closed her eyes. She wanted to lie, to give hope, but she could only whisper, "I don't know." Their eyelids grew heavy, but none of them fully slept. Each sound of footsteps made them flinch. Each gust of wind made them shiver harder. Then came a new sound, different from the cruel laughter, different from the stones thrown at them. Heavy footsteps, slow and steady, approaching from the dark street. The children's eyes opened wide. Fear gripped them. The youngest whispered, Who is that?" They could not see the figure clearly, only a tall shadow moving closer, step by step. The sound echoed through the empty streets. The children huddled tighter, hearts racing. Was it another bully? A guard to chase them away? Or someone worse? The shadow paused at the edge of the fountain. The children held their breath. And then, the figure knelt down, placing something on the cracked stone. The smell drifted toward them. Not rotten fruit, not spoiled scraps, but fresh bread. The children stared in shock. Their hunger fought with fear. None of them moved. The shadow spoke. The voice was deep, calm, and unlike any they had ever heard before. "Eat," the figure said. "No one should starve tonight." The children looked at one another with wide eyes. For the first time in their lives, kindness had found them in the cold streets. The figure stepped closer, the sound of his boots heavy on the broken stone. The children's eyes followed him, fear mixing with hunger. They had never seen a human before. His frame was tall, broader than any alien they knew, his skin pale compared to their glowing shades, and his eyes shone with quiet fire under the dim street lamps. The children pressed against each other, too scared to move, but the smell of warm bread filled the air, stronger than their fear. The man placed more food from his pack. Dried meat, a flask of water, and fruit that glowed faintly in the night. His voice was calm, but carried weight. "Take it. I will not hurt you." The oldest child shook his head, suspicion burning in his eyes. "Why?" he asked. His voice cracked. "Why would you give us food?" The man looked at them for a long moment before answering. "Because you are hungry." His words were simple, spoken like truth itself. The children hesitated, still trapped between fear and need. They had learned the world gave nothing for free. Kindness was always a trick, a trap waiting to close. The youngest's stomach growled loudly. She looked at the bread with watery eyes. Her small fingers trembled as she whispered, "It smells real." The human smiled softly. He tore a piece of bread and ate it himself before placing the rest back on the stone. "See? It is safe." That simple act broke the wall of fear. The youngest crawled forward first. She grabbed the bread and stuffed it into her mouth. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she chewed. Her siblings followed, grabbing food, drinking water, their hunger stronger than their doubts. The man watched them silently. His face carried no disgust, only quiet concern. When the children finished, they looked at him again. This time not with fear, but with confusion. "Who are you?" the oldest boy asked. His tone was still sharp, but softer than before. "My name is Daniel," the human replied. His voice was deep but gentle. "I am a traveler, passing through your town." The name meant nothing to them, but the sound of it felt steady. The children exchanged glances, whispering softly among themselves. The girl who had spoken about being unwanted finally found her courage. She looked up at him and asked, Do you think we are monsters?" Daniel crouched lower, his eyes leveling with theirs. "No," he said firmly. "I see children, hungry and cold. Nothing more, nothing less." The words struck them like a spark in the dark. For so long they had heard only insults. Greedy, shameful, worthless. But this stranger, this human, had said the opposite. The silence was heavy, broken only by the sound of water dripping somewhere in the alley. Then one boy asked the question that lived in all their hearts. "Why would you care?" Daniel looked at them, his gaze steady. His answer was soft but carried steel, "Because someone must." The children lowered their eyes. Their hearts trembled with emotions they did not understand. Hope, fear, longing, all mixing together. But then the oldest stiffened. His sharp ears picked up movement in the street. Shadows danced under the lamps, voices muttering in the distance. "They're coming," he whispered, panic rising. Daniel turned his head, his eyes narrowed. He recognized the sound, mocking laughter, careless footsteps, the same ones that had chased him through other towns, bullies dressed in wealth, drunk on cruelty. The children began to shiver. "They'll hurt us," one whispered. "They'll take the food," another whimpered. Daniel stood tall, his figure like a wall between them and the approaching voices. His jaw tightened as he placed his hand on the hilt of a blade strapped at his side. "Stay behind me," he said. His voice was calm, but carried a force that made the children's hearts steady. The voices grew louder, sneering, cruel. "So here they are, the greedy mouths," one called out. "And look, a human fool feeding them." The children shrank back, but Daniel did not move. His shadow stretched long over the broken fountain. His eyes burned as he spoke words the children would never forget. "They are not trash," he said. His voice was thunder in the night. "And if you try to touch them, you'll answer to me." The street fell silent for a moment. The children clung to each other, hearts pounding. For the first time in their lives, someone stood between them and the world's cruelty. They had no idea what would happen next, but deep inside, a spark of hope lit their hearts. The night was no longer just cold and cruel. A stranger had arrived, and with him came the first taste of defiance. The street fell into a strange silence. The bullies didn't expect resistance, especially not from a human. They looked at each other, confused and irritated. Daniel stood like a statue, tall and unshaken. His hand rested near the blade, but his voice remained calm. "Leave, before you lose more than pride." The leader of the group, a purple-scaled alien with gold rings on his arms, stepped forward. "These things are filth," he hissed. "They don't deserve food or protection." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "You think children deserve hunger?" he asked. His tone didn't rise, but every word carried weight. "That says more about you than them." For a few tense seconds no one moved. The children peeked from behind. Daniel, afraid the bullies would attack. Their small bodies trembled, hands clutching each other. But then the leader scoffed and turned away. "Waste of time," he muttered. "Let the fool feed his pets." He spat on the ground and walked off, his gang following behind. Only after their footsteps faded did Daniel relax. He looked back at the children. It's over, for now. The oldest boy still stood frozen, eyes wide with disbelief. "You scared them away," he whispered. Daniel nodded slowly. "They're just loud cowards." The younger children rushed to the food again, chewing hungrily. They hadn't eaten a full meal in days. Now the bread felt warm, the meat rich, the water fresh like a stream. One of the girls bit into a fruit and gasped. "It's sweet," she said with shining eyes. "It tastes like joy." Daniel smiled, sitting down beside them. He opened his pack and offered more. "Eat as much as you need." The children looked at him in silence. They had never known a stranger to give without asking anything back. They had never seen anyone treat them like they mattered. The girl with the smallest frame leaned forward. "You're not from here," she said softly. "Why help us?" Daniel looked at the stars above, as if remembering something far away. "Because I know what it's like to be thrown away," he answered. "To be told you're less because of what you need." The children were quiet again, but not because they were scared. The silence was different. They were listening with their hearts. "Did they throw you away too?" one boy asked. Daniel nodded. "Not for eating too much, but for asking too many questions," he said with a faint smile, "and for caring about the wrong people." The children didn't understand everything, but they understood enough. This human wasn't just kind. He was like them, broken in a way no one else had cared to notice. The youngest crawled close. Erin touched Daniel's arm. "Can we stay with you?" she whispered. "Just for tonight?" Daniel didn't answer right away. He looked at their tiny faces, dirty but glowing in the moonlight. His heart tightened. "Yes," he said at last. "Tonight, and as many nights as you need." Tears welled in the children's eyes. They hadn't expected him to say yes. Their entire lives had been full of rejection. Now someone had said yes without fear, without disgust. Daniel pulled a thermal blanket from his pack and wrapped it around them. He sat beside them and stayed awake, listening to the city breathing. The children, warm and full, began to fall asleep one by one. Their heads rested on each other, tiny bodies finally allowed to rest without fear. Before sleep took her, the smallest child whispered again, "What do we call you?" Daniel looked at her and replied softly, "Call me whatever brings you peace." She smiled weakly, her voice almost gone. "You feel like a father." Daniel didn't speak, but his chest ached in a way he hadn't felt in years. He placed a gentle hand on her head. The stars above blinked quietly, and for the first time in many nights, the children slept not as outcasts, but as something closer to a family. They did not know what the morning would bring, but for now, they had warmth, food, and hope. And in the middle of the cold, cruel city, that was everything. The early morning light touched the cracked fountain where the children slept. Their small forms were curled up under Daniel's blanket, safe for the first time in days. Daniel sat awake, back straight against the cold stone. His eyes never left the street. The night had been calm, but he knew calm rarely lasted long in this place. One by one, the children began to stir. They rubbed their eyes and looked around, confused at first, then surprised to see food still beside them, warmth still around them, and the humans still there. "You didn't leave," one child whispered. Daniel smiled gently. "I said I wouldn't." They ate again, carefully this time, not rushing like before. It wasn't just food anymore. It was trust, slowly being built bite by bite. But the quiet didn't last long. Voices began to rise in the street, harsh and sharp. The market nearby was waking up, and with it came the noise of angry tongues. "Those brats are still here," someone shouted. "Didn't they get thrown out last night?" Another voice sneered. "Now there's a human feeding them? What is this madness?" The children froze, their hands gripping the bread tightly. Fear returned to their eyes, memories of insults flooding back. Daniel stood, tall and steady, shielding them once again. He glanced at the crowd beginning to gather at the edge of the market road, vendors, merchants, and townsfolk, all curious, all judgmental. Their colorful robes and jeweled accessories couldn't hide the ugliness in their expressions. One woman pointed, "Feeding trash only brings more trash, human or not. He's just creating problems." Another man barked, "Get them out of here. They're filth. Beggars with big mouths and no manners." The children huddled behind Daniel, the warmth they had felt now replaced with shame. Daniel took one step forward, his eyes calm but voice unshakable. "They are children," he said, "hungry, cast out, not criminals." The crowd laughed. "They eat too much," one man said. "They eat more than the village can give." A woman in green shouted, "Then let the human feed all of them. Let's see how long he lasts." More laughter followed, cruel and bitter. Daniel didn't flinch. He placed his hand on the shoulder of the oldest boy behind him. "You've done nothing wrong," he said loud enough for the crowd to hear. "You were punished for needing something every living being needs, food." The crowd quieted for a moment, surprised at his words. Daniel continued, "And the ones who turned their backs, they're the true shame." Gasps and murmurs spread. The merchants looked at each other. They're unsure how to respond. No one had ever spoken like this, especially not for the children. "You don't belong here, human," one elder warned. "This is not your problem." Daniel met his gaze. "It became my problem the moment I saw what you did to them." Behind him, the children stood straighter. Their fear was still there, but now something new was rising, a feeling they didn't yet recognize. It was pride. Daniel turned back to the children. "You don't need to hide anymore," he said. "You're not alone." One girl wiped her tears and stepped forward beside him. Her voice was shaky but clear. "We didn't ask to be thrown away." The crowd didn't cheer, but they didn't speak either. The silence felt louder than any shout. Daniel picked up his pack and nodded toward the children. "Let's go," he said. "You don't need their permission to be alive." The children followed, heads a little higher than before. As they walked through the street, the crowd parted slowly. Some sneered, some turned away, but a very few, watched with quiet eyes, and one whispered under her breath, "Maybe we were wrong." The town square was alive with color. Flags swayed in the morning wind. Merchants shouted prices. Children played on steps carved from ancient stone. But when Daniel and the abandoned alien children entered, the air shifted, eyes turned, voices quieted. A human walking through the center was strange enough, but the group of alien children trailing behind him like a silent shadow? That was unheard of. Daniel walked straight through the middle, head high, boots hitting the ground with firm purpose. The children stayed close, still unsure but holding their fear with quiet strength. Whispers followed them like smoke. "That's him," someone murmured. "The human who feeds the shameful ones." "He brought them into the square," another hissed. "In daylight." An alien shopkeeper blocked Daniel's path, his robes flowing with gold patterns. "You can't parade them here," he snapped. "This is a clean space." Daniel didn't stop. "Then wash your mind," he said, moving past. Gasps rang out. Some laughed nervously, not knowing if the human was mad or brave. Near the center stood the old message pillar, where laws were announced and orders declared. Daniel climbed the first few steps and turned. The children stood at the base, looking up at him with wide eyes. "This place belongs to the people," Daniel said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. "But what kind of people throw away their young?" A crowd began to form, pulled by curiosity, anger, and something deeper, shame. "They say these children eat too much," he continued, pointing to the group behind him. "That they're a burden, a disgrace." He took a pause, eyes scanning the faces. "But the real disgrace is a society that values silence over justice." The crowd shifted. Some crossed their arms, others glanced at the children. A tall figure in silver armor appeared near the edge. A town guard, his steps heavy as he walked, head toward the pillar. Behind him, more followed, 4 in total, hands resting on stun spears. One guard shouted, "You're not permitted to speak on the pillar, human." Daniel didn't step down. "I speak as a father," he said, "and no law forbids a father from protecting his children." Murmurs spread. "Father?" The children looked at each other, unsure, their eyes locked on Daniel's face. The guards surrounded the base. One stepped forward. "You have no claim on them," he said. "They are not yours, and you are not one of us." Daniel's reply was calm. "You don't need blood to make a family." The lead guard raised his hand. "Step down, or face removal." Daniel's voice sharpened. "Remove me, and show everyone here what their law really protects. Cruelty." The crowd was silent. A mother nearby held her daughter's hand a little tighter. A young merchant looked away, his jaw clenched. One child took a step forward, then another. They climbed beside Daniel one by one, until the whole group stood on the steps with him. The youngest girl clutched his hand and looked at the guards. Her voice was soft, but it broke the silence. "He didn't throw us away," she said. "He gave us food and warmth and a name." The crowd stirred. Something shifted in the atmosphere. Not revolution, not yet, but a small crack in the wall of cruelty. One guard lowered his spear, hesitant now. The leader looked unsure. Daniel placed a hand on the girl's shoulder and said to the crowd, "They called them animals, but I see children. I see life. I see hope." And in that square, surrounded by judgment and fear, his voice planted a seed no one could erase. For the first time, the town was not just watching. It was listening. The silence in the square grew heavy. The guards stood frozen, unsure whether to strike or stand down. Daniel didn't move from the pillar. The children stayed by his side, frightened but firm. The oldest boy whispered, "They're going to hurt you." Daniel looked at him, his voice steady. "Then I will take the pain before any of you do." Gasps echoed through the crowd. The townspeople had never seen anyone stand for outcasts, let alone risk their life for them. The lead guard stepped forward again, his voice sharp. "You've broken multiple laws, speaking without permit, protecting exiles, and now causing public unrest." Daniel didn't blink. Feeding the hungry is not unrest. It's healing what you ignored. The guard raised his weapon, a crackling spear designed to stun and burn. "Final warning, human," he growled. "Step down or be taken." Daniel reached to his side and pulled his cloak aside, revealing a small metallic badge pinned to his belt. The light caught it, an ancient Earth symbol mixed with Galactic Alliance script. Some in the crowd gasped, others leaned forward trying to read it. One of the younger guards stepped back, his eyes wide. "Wait, that's an old protectorate mark. He's a war medic." The elder guard's hand faltered. "You were military?" Daniel nodded. 12 years in the outer conflict, I saved lives that others threw away, same as now. The people in the square began to murmur. This was no ordinary human. This was someone who had risked everything before, someone trained not just to fight, but to protect. The children didn't understand the badge, but they felt its weight. Their fear began to shift into pride again. The oldest boy whispered, "You're really not afraid?" Daniel looked him in the eyes. "Of them?" "No." The guard's face twisted in frustration. "This is not a battlefield, human." Daniel stepped down one step from the pillar, just enough to meet him at eye level. "Every place becomes a battlefield when the innocent are pushed aside." The guard snapped his fingers. 2 soldiers stepped forward but hesitated. Their hands hovered over their weapons, unsure if they wanted this fight. And then came a voice from the crowd, an old woman with faded robes. "I watched those children get dragged into the alley last month," she said. "No one did anything." Another voice joined. "I gave one of them a scrap of bread once, and was fined." More murmurs followed, faces changed, postures softened. Some looked at Daniel now not with anger, but with respect. Daniel stepped fully down from the pillar, and stood between the children and the guards. "If you want them, you'll have to go through me." The guards didn't move. The lead one gritted his teeth, but his grip loosened. He knew it. If he attacked, the crowd might turn, the town might burn. And the human before him wasn't just strong. He was right. The guard finally growled, "Fine, but take them out of the square before this turns into a riot." Daniel didn't thank him. He simply turned back to the children. "Let's go." They moved slowly, not as shadows anymore, but as something braver. The crowd parted again, but this time with silence and lowered eyes. Some even stepped aside with guilt. Others watched with quiet awe. As Daniel led them toward the edge of the town, one of the guards whispered to another. He called them his family. And the other replied, "Maybe that's what scares us most." The sun began to dip behind the distant hills, casting long shadows over the alien town. Daniel and the children walked silently through the narrow paths, leaving the square behind. Their footsteps were slow. Some children looked back, still afraid someone would chase them again. Daniel remained alert, scanning corners and rooftops as they passed. His instincts, sharpened by war, told him the trouble wasn't over yet. He led them toward an old shelter just outside the marketplace, half broken but still standing. "You'll rest here tonight," he said. "Tomorrow, we decide what comes next." Inside, the children sat on dusty floors, grateful just to be out of the open. Daniel passed out his remaining food, careful to divide it fairly. As they ate, the youngest girl tugged on his sleeve. "Will they come again?" she asked softly. Daniel knelt beside her. "They might," he admitted, "but they'll have to go through me first." She smiled, small but brave. Just then, a crash echoed from outside. A rock smashed through the windowless frame, hitting the wall and falling near a boy's foot. The children screamed and ducked. Daniel leapt up, body tense. He ran to the doorway and scanned the shadows. Figures moved just beyond the glow of the nearest lamp, 5 or 6, dressed in dark robes, faces covered, voices sharp and hateful. "You made fools of us, human," one shouted, "feeding garbage and speaking like a hero." Another added, "We warned you, you didn't listen." Daniel stepped outside, hands open but posture ready. "The children are no threat," he said. "Walk away." A stone hit him square in the shoulder, but he didn't flinch. His stare was colder than steel. The attackers didn't back down. One pulled a weapon, a shock rod used by street enforcers. It hissed to life with electric energy. The children cried from inside the shelter, huddling close. Daniel's voice dropped. "Lower. You don't want this fight." The leader of the group laughed. "You think we fear one human?" The rod came down fast. Daniel dodged and caught the attacker's wrist mid-swing, twisting hard and sending him to the ground. Another charged. Daniel turned, grabbed his cloak, and threw him aside. Years of battlefield reflexes awakened in seconds. But then, in the chaos, a scream rang out from behind. One of the attackers had slipped past and reached the shelter. A boy stood in the doorway, shielding the youngest girl. The attacker raised a stick, his arm swinging. "No!" Daniel shouted, rushing forward. Too far, too late. The attacker's strike landed, not on the boy, but on the girl. Her small body dropped with a thud. The entire world froze. Daniel tackled the attacker to the ground and knocked him unconscious with one strike. His hands shook, not with rage, but with fear. He turned to the girl. The children crowded around her, crying, "She's not moving!" Daniel dropped to his knees, lifting her gently. Her breathing was shallow, skin bruised where the rod had struck. "We need help," he whispered, voice cracking. "Now." But the attackers had scattered, leaving only silence behind. Daniel held the girl close to his chest. "Stay with me," he whispered. "You're strong. You're safe now." The others gathered around, tears falling, faces pale. The oldest boy looked at Daniel and asked the question they all feared. "Will she die?" Daniel's jaw tightened. He had seen many wounded, many fallen, but this child had just found peace, and now she could be gone. "No," he said at last, "not tonight." He stood with her in his arms, eyes fierce. We go to the town clinic. They will treat her, and if they refuse, I'll tear their walls down." For the first time, the children didn't just see him as protector. They saw him as family, and as Daniel marched toward the center of the town again, carrying the broken child, the city would soon realize what it meant to push a human past the breaking point. The night was cold, but Daniel's body burned with rage as he carried the unconscious child through the streets. Her tiny head rested against his chest, barely moving. Her breath was shallow, too shallow. Behind him, the rest of the children followed silently, eyes wide with fear and hope. Their feet moved quickly, but without sound. They trusted only one thing now: the man leading them. The town's central clinic stood ahead, its lights glowing in pale blue. Daniel kicked the door open, not bothering to knock. A nurse gasped as he entered. "You can't just—" "She was attacked," Daniel said, voice like thunder. "She needs help." The nurse hesitated when she saw the alien child in his arms. Her face shifted, from surprise to discomfort. "That one?" she said. "They're not registered citizens." Daniel stepped forward, narrowing the gap between them. "She's a child," he said, "and she's dying. You will help her." Another staff member, an older doctor, stepped into the room. "We don't treat exiles here," he said coldly. "Take her to the outskirts, to the scrap shelters." Daniel stared at him. "By the time I walk that far, she'll be gone." The doctor folded his arms. "Then that's not our concern." For a second, Daniel didn't move. Then, without a word, he placed the child gently on the nearest bed. His hands shook, but not from fear. "You touch her with anything less than care," he said slowly, "and you'll wish I left this planet before tonight." The doctor froze. The look in Daniel's eyes was not a threat. It was a promise. The nurse, finally moved by something deeper, stepped forward. "I'll treat her," she said, ignoring the doctor's warning glance. "Help me get supplies." Daniel stepped back, letting her work. His fists were still clenched as he turned toward the door. He needed air. He needed space to think. Outside, people had begun to gather. The news had spread. Fast, whispers filled the air. He brought her here. She was attacked? He stood against guards for them. An old merchant stood watching, eyes full of guilt. He had once thrown stale fruit at those children. Now he watched a human fight harder for them than anyone from their own kind ever had. Another woman, the baker's wife, clutched a basket of warm bread and whispered, "They never asked for this pain." Someone stepped forward from the crowd, holding a blanket. "Where are the others?" he asked softly. Daniel pointed behind him. The children stood in the street, huddled together, unsure what to do. The man approached them slowly and placed the blanket around one of the shivering girls. No words, just an action, small but heavy. That one gesture broke something. One by one, others followed, offering food, coats, water, and quiet apologies. The children didn't know how to respond. They looked at Daniel, who gave a slight nod. "It's okay," he said. "Let them try." Inside the clinic, the nurse worked fast. The child's breathing grew steadier. The machines hummed quietly. A soft beep signaled hope. The nurse looked up at Daniel. "She'll live," she said. "Barely, but she'll live." Daniel let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Thank you," he said, his voice softer now. Outside, a small group of townspeople had begun to gather near the fountain, placing candles and food. Not in mockery this time, but in quiet repentance. The baker, who had once refused to sell to the hungry children, whispered, "I didn't know it had gone this far." Daniel didn't respond. He didn't need to. The truth was now too loud to ignore. That night, something began to change in the town. Not all at once, not fully, but enough. Enough to prove that even the coldest hearts can begin to thaw. And it all started because one human chose to stand when no one else would. The morning sun rose slowly over the town, its golden light washing away the shadows of the long night. But for the children huddled outside the clinic, sleep had not come. They sat close together, watching the door where their smallest sister was being treated. Daniel stood at the edge of the street, his eyes heavy but his posture still strong. His mind replayed the moment she fell, again and again. He hadn't cried, not once. But now, with the danger past, the weight sat deeply on his chest. The clinic door creaked open, and the nurse stepped out. Her face was tired but gentle. "She's stable," she said. "You can see her now." Daniel nodded. The children rushed past him, their small feet pattering across the floor. Inside, the smallest girl lay on a clean bed, her breathing steady. Her eyes fluttered open as her siblings gathered around. "You're all here," she whispered, voice soft like wind. One of the boys held her hand. "You scared us," he said, his voice cracking. She gave a weak smile. "I dreamed I was flying, and then I heard his voice." She turned her head slowly to look at Daniel. "You called me back." Daniel stepped closer, his voice quiet. "I wasn't going to let you go." The girl blinked at him. "Are you really our father now?" Daniel didn't answer right away. He looked at all of them, the scars on their faces, the pain in their hearts, the way they looked at him with both hope and fear. "I didn't ask for this," he said, "but I would fight for you again, without thinking. I'd bleed for you. I'd carry you through fire." Then he smiled, soft and full of pain. "If that doesn't make me your father, I don't know what does." Tears spilled from the children's eyes. One by one they came to him, arms wrapping around his waist, his hands resting gently on their heads. No one spoke. No one needed to. Outside the clinic, more townsfolk gathered. Some brought blankets, some brought food, but most just watched, uncertain how to fix what they had ignored for so long. The baker stepped forward again. "We were wrong," he said quietly. "All of us. We forgot how to see children." Daniel looked at him, not with anger, but with calm strength. "Then start remembering today." The town leader arrived not long after. His long robe trailed behind him, his face tight with concern. "Human," he said, "we owe you an apology. And perhaps something more." Daniel crossed his arms. "They don't need your words," he replied. "They need homes, food, safety, and names." The leader hesitated, then bowed slightly. "Then that is what they will have." Daniel turned to the children. "Do you want to stay here?" he asked. "Or come with me?" The youngest girl answered first. "With you," she said, her voice trembling. "Wherever you go." The others nodded. Some wiped their eyes. Some held his hand tighter. And so it was decided. Daniel didn't just rescue them. He became their anchor, their voice, their protector. Weeks passed. The town slowly changed. A new shelter was built with real beds, real food, and real care. But Daniel and the children did not stay there forever. One morning, they left. Together, boarding a ship that drifted toward the stars. The last thing anyone saw was the smallest girl waving goodbye, a bright smile on her face. They had been abandoned for eating too much, mocked, hated, and hurt. But they found love not in the hands of their own kind. They found it in the arms of a human. And from that day on, they didn't call him stranger or protector. They called him father.